Microsoft Flight released to the world on February 29th, 2012. Unfortunately though, it wasn't too well received by the flight simming community, and within a year, Microsoft stopped developing for the game in July 2012 before cancelling all support and shutting down Flight's multiplayer servers on October 14th, 2014. So what went wrong with Microsoft Flight? There is a simple answer, and that is the fact that, for some, it felt too much like a game and not a simulator. Bearing in mind this was the first major release of a flight simulator for over 6 years after FSX came out in 2006, for many this game was very overhyped and disappointed with the arcadey controls, lack of jets, and very restricted scenery. But was Microsoft Flight all that bad? Let's take a look, shall we? The first thing you notice in Flight is the UI. It does look somewhat gamey, but at the end of the day, it's fairly easy to understand. You have the maps in the top left, aircraft hangar in the bottom left, giving you a small but varied selection of general aviation aircraft and World War II fighters to choose from, including a few other aircraft that was later modded into the game once the support was abandoned from Microsoft. No jets however, which was a limiting factor. And finally, free flights from your current location, or selecting a new starting point from the airport itself using the runway menu on the right. Compared to simulators before like FSX and even FS 2004, this gives you a lot more freedom to where exactly you want to fly. Fair enough, you only are limited to Hawaii and Alaska, but this freedom in starting physically anywhere in the map is not something you even find today. Once you load up the simulator, which only takes a fraction of a second, the next thing you notice is the Foreground Scenery, and despite made in the same ESP engine as FSX, FS 2004 and all the previous simulators, the ground environment really does look fantastic. Sky colours are realistic, ground textures are to a high quality, and even the autogen sits on the ground fitting with their surroundings thanks to a new ground class definition supplied. While autogen is still being used in Flight, the way it has been done makes it look a lot more accurate than before, making the entire visible world almost look like VFR scenery. A higher LOD ground mesh is also obvious, bringing new details to the surrounding mountains, lakes and rivers, giving off a much better set of elevation data, but the thing that tops this all off is the default airports in Flight. The default airports are surrounded by VFR satellite imagery and are all hand built. This gives you a full representation of what the airports are like, which in terms of immersion is really good. Yes, the runways are still flat, which is something that will always be a limiting factor of the ESP engine, but the airport surroundings are more than enough to compensate this downside. And even the night environment has also seen some minor tweaks and improvements to it as well from FSX, where the ground night textures have definitely been revamped, although no 3D lighting as of yet, and the in-game shaders, they're not too bad, giving you a bit more of a realistic night environment to fly in. But still, there's definitely a lot to be desired. Aircraft in Flight are also not too bad. Physics-wise, they aren't perfect, but are a massive improvement to what FSX gave us in their .air files. Instead, we now see .spb files in the aircraft, which is a first attempt at trying to create some form of airflow within the simulator, which gives each aircraft its own feel when in the air and on the ground. A lot less predictable than FSX, some aircraft will also take a little bit of time to adjust to. Aircraft models themselves are also really good. Modelled to a high quality, they do match their real-world counterparts through bump mapping, texturing, and even the simulator shaders itself acting on the aircraft. Not all of them have virtual cockpits as the game was never finished before it was dropped, but for those that do, you get a fully interactive environment with functional buttons and switches. Sounds in the aircraft, both exterior and interior, are also done to the highest of quality. No more hairdryer sounds, each individual button and switch now has its own sound, and in an aircraft like the Icon A5, you can also hear a quiet yet audible squeak when you do move the flight stick. Each aircraft also has its own different sound set, meaning unlike in FSX where say, The 737, 747, A321 all shared the same sounds. Each aircraft has its own audio, which really does help in giving each aircraft its own character within the simulator. Going back to the flight dynamics, there is also one more thing that Flight has included, something that was removed back in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2000, and that is proper crash physics. While crashing is not something everyone in the flight sim community endorses, it does allow for some better emergency simulation too. For example, if your landing gear fails to lower, or you suffer engine problems over the sea, it is now possible to perform a belly landing, or ditch within the simulator itself, with aircraft now acting as it should. No more freeze frame telling you you've crashed or splashed, but instead a cutscene of your aircraft coming to a halt depending on the terrain. Likewise, if there is a fence or a building in your way, proper collision detection is now a thing, where they will stop you in your path. Camera controls in the simulator are also vastly improved from before and really add to ease of use. Right click and drag is now used to move the camera, whilst left click is still used to interact with the cockpit. The mouse wheel also allows you to zoom in and out, and depending on where your mouse is, will also move the camera to that position. Holding down the middle mouse button inside the virtual cockpit also allows you to move your camera within the cockpit to different viewing points, which is definitely a massive bonus from the previous FSX camera. This is really good when it comes to ease of use, and is something that many did find a relief when Flight did release initially. Camera views, however, are the same as FSX, minus the 2D cockpit, which a number of simulators these days are now dropping. Missions themselves also weren't too bad. My personal favourites are the Pilot for Hire missions, where you are tasked with taking an aircraft between two airports, carrying different loads with you. This sort of mission would definitely fit well in an open world environment, and overall, gave the simulator some sort of variety as you flew. One thing that the simulator also introduced was Aero Caches. Essentially, this was a massive treasure hunt around the world, taking you to different sites worldwide. Whether it were a famous building, landmark or national park, flying over these would teach you a little bit about the surrounding area, as well as show off the high detailed modelling that the developers had put into the locations. This was aimed at simmers who were fairly new to the genre, or for those that wanted to fly to a new location, but unfortunately with the limited environment available at the time, this system never really took off and was later abandoned entirely. Overall, I really don't think Microsoft Flight was that bad of a simulator. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Far from it, in fact. The limited aircraft environment did really stagnate what could have been its full potential, but at the end of the day, was it really that bad of a simulator? No, it really wasn't. For those that likes their general aviation aircraft, this simulator basically did give you everything you wanted, from a nice selection of aircraft to some really detailed ground scenery. Oh, and don't forget that this was also a free simulator. No charge behind it other than to unlock an extra aircraft which could have been unlocked for free with enough playtime, but the thing that really killed it was the hype that it gained before release. With no other simulators really taking the lead spot other than Microsoft Flight Simulator X, we were all possibly expecting too much from Flight, which led to its very premature demise. Looking deeper into the files within the simulator, and the locations of the Aero Caches themselves, it does appear that Microsoft would have eventually released the entire world within the simulator, but with the Games for Windows marketplace closing down, and the little support behind this project, there really was only one option that Microsoft would have gone for, and it was to close down Flight, and that, at the end of the day, is what killed it.